This week I'm going to show you how to make a sci-fi movie poster from start to finish.
Adorama TV presents Digital Photography One-on-One, where we answer your questions. Here's your host, Mark Wallace.
Hi everybody, welcome to this week's episode of Digital Photography One-on-One. We have a lot to talk about in this episode. In fact, we have so much to talk about. This episode is a little bit longer. In fact, it could be the longest episode we've ever done. So let's get started by looking at this week's question. This question comes from Michael in Michigan, and Michael asked, is there any reason that you would want to have lens flares in your pictures? Well, Michael, usually you don't want lens flares. Lens flares are what happens when you have light coming straight into your lens and it casts this really crazy image, sort of circles through your image. Now, sometimes you want those if you're shooting some romantic scenes or things like that, but sometimes you can use lens flares for special effects. And that's what we're going to do today. We're actually going to go into the studio and build an environment out of nothing but light coming into our lens and on our model, and we're going to add a little smoke. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take that image and throw it into Photoshop and do a lot of post-production. In fact, today most of what we're going to talk about is how to do all of the Lightroom and Photoshop work to create something out of an okay image. So let's get started by going into the studio and shaping an image using light. All right, well now we're here in the studio and Ellie has joined us. She's going to be our model today. And I want to walk you through all these lights because again, the point of this is to build an environment out of nothing but lights and give some depth to the scene. And so the very first thing I want to show you is the key light. This is this light right over here. And this is the same kind of thing that we would do with any kind of portrait lighting setup. So this key light is lighting Ellie, and it's a pretty zoomed in light. So it's not lighting much more than just Ellie and nothing else. And back here, what we want to do is we want to give us a nice dark background. So we have this big black backdrop. Now the problem with that is it will have Ellie's black hair here just blends right in with that background. So we actually have a hair light back here. Again, this is just normal portrait lighting stuff. The key to this setup though is this light and this light right here. And what we're doing is we're breaking all the rules. We're doing exactly what everybody tells you not to do, and that is we're shining light right into the lens. And so what we're doing here is you can see that we have those lights shining right into the lens. In fact, normally you have a lens hood on your camera to make sure that you don't have any light hitting that, and we want the light to come right in to give us all kinds of lens flare. Now what lens flare is when light comes right into the lens right into our lens, it starts bouncing around on all that glass and it creates these effects that most of the time are not desirable, but we want that. And so you can see even there are reflections of the lights that we have pointed at our camera, and I'll show you what that looks like when we take a picture. So if you zip over here, what we'll do is we're going to take a shot really quickly. So Ellie, look right at me, beautiful, just like that, great. And you can see that we have all of this light coming in and bouncing around, and it actually adds a little bit of depth to our image. And that's what we want to do. We want to actually add some three-dimensional looks to this set that's just nothing but light. Now one more thing that we're going to do here, just to sort of try around, is we have this very inexpensive $25 smoke machine that we got at a local Halloween shop. And what that's going to do is it's just going to blast a little bit of smoke, and when it does, it'll give us just a little bit more texture to our image. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to shoot around, and we'll show you the results of our set that's built out of nothing but lights. All right, let's walk through really quickly all the steps that it takes to get from our initial image all the way to a final output, which is going to be a movie poster type setup. So what we're going to do here is I first need to show you what I've done in Lightroom. And so I'm going to be using Lightroom 3 and Photoshop CS5.5. Now the first thing I did was I already went through all of the images and I selected the images that I thought would work for a movie poster, and I've already made some adjustments, but let me really quickly go through and show you how I get from this sort of bland image where we have these lights into something that we can actually use in Photoshop. So I'm going to go over to the develop module, and I'm not going to be telling you every single shortcut key I'm using here. I'm going to assume that you know a little bit about Photoshop and Lightroom. That's why we've called this an advanced video. So the first thing I want to do here is I need to get some color into the image. And to do that, there are all these presets over here that can really punch up the color and give us some really interesting things. And so I've chosen to use this one right up here, and this is the Creative Color CP2. So I'm going to click that, and immediately you can see that now we have blues, so we have more contrast, all kinds of things that are going on here. Now once I have that, I'm going to close this panel, zip over here to the right side, open up that panel, and then I'm going to make some adjustments here in my exposure and all kinds of things. So the first thing I want to do is I want to bump up my clarity just a little bit. So I'm cranking it up to 59. So I want this to be really punchy over here so that when we're editing in Photoshop, we really have a high contrast image. The other thing I want to do is I need to crank up my exposure just a little bit more, so about 3/4 of a stop. Now I shot all this in RAW, so I have all the ability to really make some changes on this, and so I'm just going to type this in here. So 3/4 of a stop, and so I've increased the output of that. Now the other thing I want to do is I want to change my blacks and my shadows, and so I'm going to first go in here to my blacks, and I'm going to go up to about a 21. So I'm really bringing those blacks down so that we're losing a lot of that background. So I want it to be really, really dark. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change my fill light just a little bit. So right now it's at 0. I'm going to bring that back up to about 20, 21, something like that. So I'm bringing back up those lights a little bit. And then the other thing I want to do here, actually I think that's a little bit too much. I'm going to bring it back down to about 10 or 11. Okay, we're pretty good there. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust my darks and my shadows. So I'm going to take my darks down to about 25, 26, around there. So again, I'm just really losing those dark areas there. And then my shadows look pretty good, but I'll just adjust those a little bit, maybe down to 30. And so what I've done here is I'll kick out all the panels, hit Y for before and after, and you can see that this is low contrast, the after a really high contrast with a little bit more yellow, a lot more blue, and we can really see some of those lens flares. And that's the only thing I did in Lightroom is I just adjusted the tonality a little bit. So once I had that image, what I did was I took this, I selected all the other ones, and then I went down and hit sync settings, so all the images would have the same exact settings. So once I did that, I wanted to just pick an image that I think is going to work. So I just sort of went through these and found one that I sort of like. And so this one here I think is going to make a good image. Now notice we have lens flare up here on the right hand side. It's coming in. We've got lens flare over here on the left hand side. And what I really want to do is drop this into a background and make it look like these lights are coming from something else besides strobes. And so what I'm going to do here, the first thing I'm going to do is right click. I'm going to say edit in, open as a smart object in Photoshop. Now I want to open it as a smart object because right now I think her skin is a little bit yellow. So if I want to change that, I want to open it as a smart object so I can just open up the raw image and then make my adjustments and then apply it. And so doing this as a smart object allows me the ability to make adjustments if I want to. So the other thing I need to do is I need a background to place her onto. So luckily I'll go back over here to Lightroom, and I will go back over to my library module here. And once I get into the library module, I have this image right here. Now this is Times Square in New York City. I shot this last year. I think this will make a great background. And we'll show you how we're going to turn this into a sci-fi sort of scene. So really the thing that I was looking for when I looked for a background was something that had a lot of color and something that I could make it look like they were illuminating the back of our model. And so this has a lot of color. It's got a lot of light here. It's got some problems. It's got a bunch of people here. It's got a light pole, but we can get around that really easily. So what I'm going to do on this, I'm going to again click edit in. I'm not going to open it as a smart object because we just want to have it as a background. So I'm just going to say edit this in Adobe Photoshop CS1. Now once we've done that, all of our Lightroom work is finished. Now we're doing everything in Photoshop. So in Photoshop, the first thing I have to do is get this background and throw it over to our image. So I'm going to arrange my workspace here. So I'm going to do all of these. I'm going to make sure that these are all tiled. So once they're tiled, I can grab my background layer from my Times Square image, drag it over onto my image of Ellie, and just drop it. Now once I've got that done, I can get rid of this Times Square image. I'm not going to save it. I really don't care about it. And now I have my two layers over here. I have layer 1, which I'm going to rename as cool background. It's always a good idea to name your layers, because you'll see we're going to get a bunch of layers going on in this image, and I really need to keep track of them. So the other thing I need to do is, you can see that this layer is too small, so I need to enlarge it. And it doesn't really care. You're thinking, you know, what about the resolution? Aren't you going to ruin that? Well, we're going to destroy the resolution of this background, so it doesn't really matter in this scenario. I really don't care about the quality of this background. I really only care about the color and sort of the look of it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit Free Transform, which is Command T, and I'm going to drag this out. I'm hitting Shift so I can constrain my ratios here. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to drag this out. You'll probably see that we're going to be dragging this back and forth a few times, but I think that's about where I want it. Maybe I'll drag it up here, and then I'll hit Return or Enter to apply that. Now the other thing I want to do is, I don't want it to look like Times Square, and so I'm going to go up and I'm going to apply a filter, and the filter I'm going to apply is a Gaussian Blur. So I'll hit Gaussian Blur, and I really want this to be blurred out. So I'm cranking this up to almost 50 pixels, so 46.4. Obviously I've done this before, so these values have remained from the last time I did this. So I'm going to accept that. So now I have this sort of blurry background. Now the next thing I need to do is actually make this the background. So I'm going to drag it on my layers below my image of Ellie. Now the problem is it just disappears. So what we can do here is I'm going to click on the layer of Ellie, and instead of using a normal blending mode, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this. And so I'm going to use a lighten blending mode. When I do, all of these dark areas actually allow for those buildings and stuff to shine through, which is pretty cool. The problem with that is that it also shines through on Ellie, which we really don't want. The other thing is, we've got some convergence here, so these buildings are right on Ellie's face. I need to fix that first. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. So I've clicked my background. Again, I'm going to hit Free Transform, and I'm going to just sort of stretch these out a little bit, move it over a little bit. I don't want to lose this left edge here, so I have to be really careful. So I can really, because it's such a blurry background, it doesn't really matter how much I distort it, because all we care about is having something in the background there. That looks pretty good. I'll accept that. Now these aren't really merging together very well. I'll show you some tricks to make this look much more realistic. The first thing we want to do is bring Ellie back, and so I'm going to make a copy. So I'm just dragging this layer, and I'm making a copy of Ellie, and I need to paint her back in. And so what I'll do is I'm going to change the blending mode back to normal, and you can see that all of a sudden everything disappeared. That's because we have this normal copy of Ellie. So what I'm going to do is add a layer mask, and then what I will do is I'm going to paint that layer mask black. Now, the easiest way to do that is to select all, and then just hit Command Delete, and that will insert black into there. And so now we have this, basically it makes that layer disappear. So what I want to do is I want to paint Ellie back on. So I'm going to select my layer mask. I've got white selected. I'm going to get a brush by hitting B. Then I want a brush that's nice and large and really soft. So I'll get a brush that's about, 100 pixels, something like that. I can also make that larger or smaller using my keyboard shortcuts. And then I'm just going to start painting white. And as I'm painting, you can see that she is coming back through that background mess. So I'll paint her legs back in. Just really quickly, I'm just going to try to paint her back into the scene as much as possible. And you can see, because we shot with smoke and we have all this lens flare, it's hard to tell where the background stops and where our image starts, which is exactly what we wanted. We wanted an image that really blended well with this crazy background. So our arm is back in here, and the smoke sort of covers that stuff up. You can see that these lens flares that we added, they actually start to look like part of the background, which is really neat. So take the background out, put it back in. You can see that all that atmospheric stuff that we did in the studio actually works for us, not against us. Now the other thing we can do here is we can start painting in and out just to make sure that all this stuff sort of lines up. So I want this really to be great right here around her arm. So I'm going to take a little extra time to work on that. It's about where I want it to be. I think that looks pretty good. So I've got her all painted back in. I'll fix her right here. Okay. So we've done a good job of making sure that she's painted in. It looks like she's blending pretty well. And then one way to check to see exactly how she's painted in is just turn everything else off. And we can see that that looks pretty good. Now the reason that she's not totally solid is because I had my opacity set to 61%. What I can do is bring that up to 100% if I want to really bring in everything. And I didn't want to do that too much, because if you bring her in too much, then it just ruins sort of that feel of her floating on top of the background. But we really need her legs and her body to be solid. So I'm going to paint that in just really quickly to make sure that that all looks good. So you want to spend a little bit of time making sure that you've painted in your subject. Okay, especially the face. That looks pretty good right there. I like that. Now we have our model and our background, and you can see this is before, this is after. So it looks pretty cool. Maybe we have a little more room to breathe right there. Okay, now we've painted everything in. Again, I'm going really quick, so we'd probably spend a little bit more time on this if we had time. But the next thing I need to do is these aren't really meshing together very well. So if I zoom right in here full, 100%, you can see that we've got some weird lines here and things aren't exactly lining up exactly. And we need to do something to make this look a little bit more sci-fi-ish. It's a word. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add a layer of grain. Now to do this, I'm going to go to Layer, New Layer. Now the reason I'm doing this here instead of just going to my Layers palette and clicking New Layer is because when I do it this way, I can do something special. I can go to my mode and say make this an overlay, and then I can click Fill with Overlay Neutral Color, which is 50% gray, and I'm going to call this Noise, and I'll hit OK. Now we have this layer that looks like nothing at all. But the advantage of this is now I can go to Filter, and I can add some noise, and I'm going to add just some regular noise here. And then it'll ask me, do I want this to be Gaussian or uniform? I'm going to add a Gaussian noise layer that's about 49.5%. And I'm going to make sure it's monochromatic. So I want this to look like film grain. And when I do that, you can see that this immediately has all this noise on here, and it covers up all those blemishes, and it really makes our image start to blend together, which is sort of one of those tricks of retouching. So we've done this. This looks now like it has some film grain on it. It looks like our model was shot actually on this crazy background, which I really, really like. Now the other thing that we need to do here is I want this to have some scan lines, or lines that look like an old TV. And to do that, this is something that we do at the very last step after we've resized this image. And so what I'm going to do here is I need to make sure I resize this first and then add my scan line second. So I know that we're going to put this on our video that you're watching right now, and so that video is a very specific size, which is 1280 by 720 because it's 720p. And if that doesn't make sense, it doesn't really matter to you. Just make sure that you understand that when you make this pattern that I'm about to show you, you have to do it last after you've resized for the web or after you've resized for video. If you do it too soon, it's just going to look all muddy and no good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to crop this in a 16:9 aspect ratio. So this looks more like a movie poster, and something about like that. It doesn't have to be too specific. Once I get that there, I like that. I'll accept that crop. I'm really chopping down this file size now. And now we have this image. Bring it back full screen. You can see that it's starting to look more organic. Now let's talk about this interesting effect that I'm about to do. To do that, we're going to have to create a pattern. So let's do this. Let's add a new file. So File, New. And then what we want to do is we want to call this Scan Lines. You can call it whatever you want. And I want to have this to be a 1 pixel wide image. And I'm going to make it a 6 pixel high image, extremely small. And then the other thing to make sure you do is to make sure that the background is transparent. Now this size, 1:6, is totally dependent on how large your image is, and so the larger your resolution, the smaller your file can be. So you'll have to play around with this a little bit to get your scan lines to look exactly the way you want. But the lucky thing is once you do this once, you can save these as presets. So let me show you how to do this once. And I'm making sure this is square pixels, and so I'll say OK, and now I have this image. And I'll zoom way in here so we can see this. This is full size. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a pencil. Now I need a pencil because I need a very, very hard line. And then I want to make sure that I have a pencil that's 1 pixel. So a 1 pixel image there. And then I'm going to make sure that I have black selected. And so we've got that, I have black selected. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to paint in 3 pixels that are black and leave 3 pixels to be nothing. And then once that's done, I will select all. And then I'm going to come up here and make this into a pattern. So I can go in here to my edit menu, then go down to define pattern. I'll click that. So edit, define pattern. And then I'm going to just have this say scan lines, which was the name of my file. And I'll call this 3 pixels, 3px. Because I might want to have 3 pixels, 6 pixels, 5 pixels, 1 pixel. It doesn't matter. So that way I have some options there. So I'll say OK. And then I can close out the scan line. I don't need this file anymore. I'm not even going to save it. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to create a new layer. And this layer I'm going to call scan lines. And then I'm going to go up here and I'm going to go to my edit, fill, and then I'm going to use a pattern. And the pattern I'm going to use is this one that I just created. And I can change this to text only, and you can see that now I have scan lines 3 pixels. And so I'll choose that. And I'm just going to have the blending mode, normal, opacity 100%, and I'll say OK. And there you can see now we have these lines that just appeared. And so that's just the pattern that we created. So if I zoom in on this, you can see that it's just 3 pixels, no pixels, 3 pixels, no pixels, over and over and over. So I've created this pattern of lines. Really, it's very, very easy to do that. Now, it's too much right now. It's too much. It just sort of destroys our image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here to my blend mode, and I'm going to change that to overlay. And that will allow some of that background to shine through, and you can see that now that's really coming through well. And then I'm going to change my opacity because it's just too much there. The darks are too dark, and it makes everything too dark. So I'm going to bring this down to about 30 or 40%. So it's about 27% looks good. So now it's a much more subtle effect, and we'll just bring this in a little bit more. You can see that those scan lines are just much more subtle, and it looks pretty good. Now, if I would have done this before resizing, when I resized, that 3 on, 3 off would have just been resized, and it wouldn't look as good as this. So we have all this. I really like it. Now we need to finish this image up, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to add some text. So what I'll do here is I'm going to grab my text tool, and I'm going to change my my color to a nice red. Now once I have this done, I sort of like that. I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to change my font to Blade Runner movie font, which you can download. It's an open source font for the Mac. And then I'm going to change my text size to, well, 48 seems like a good starting point. And then I'm going to name this after a couple of my favorite movies. So Nikita Rent. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my free text, free transform. So I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. It's very easy to do this. So I've transformed that to about the size I want. And then here's another trick. I need to center this. So I like how it's about the right height, but I want to center this. So the fastest way to center this is just to select everything. So Command A or select all. And then I can go to Layer, and then I can go to Align Layers to Selection. And then I can say Horizontal Centers. Wham. Now it's perfectly centered. That looks pretty good, but it needs a drop shadow. So another thing we can do in CS5 and CS4, I can go to my Effects panel, click that, and I can say Drop Shadow. Now I like this drop shadow. I need it to be 100% opaque. I really want it to stand out. I like that. And now I've added this effect very, very quickly. Now my Nikita Rent just sort of pops out. Nikita for La Femme Nikita. Rent means run in German. And so Blade Runner, obviously we're knocking off Blade Runner, and also Run Lola Run is another movie. So we've taken all that and sort of put it together. Now we need to add some credits here. So the next thing I'm going to do is add another text layer, and I will do that. I'm going to click right up here, and I'm going to give Ellie some credit. And so Ellie is our model. I'm going to make this about 36 points. So I'm going to type in Ellie Diamante There it is. And this is too large. So what we need to do, first of all, I'm going to go into my text panel. I'm going to change that to white. So now that's white. That's really nice. Then I'm going to use my free transform. I'm going to bring this down to about right here. That looks pretty good. Now, to totally rip off Blade Runner, instead of just having it stand there all by itself, I'm going to add something to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another text layer, and I'm going to put this right underneath Ellie's name, and I'm going to say this is my black bar. And then what I'll do is I'll grab my polygon lasso tool, and then hitting shift to constrain my proportions so I get a nice 45. I'm going to add this. It doesn't matter what I'm doing off screen. I'll hit D to get my default colors back and X to shift those around. And then I'll fill that in with black by hitting Command Backspace or Command Delete. And then there you have it. I've got this nice black bar there to constrain that text. Then I can always move this around if I want to. And there you have it. We've got a cool movie poster. Now obviously we can play with this quite a bit. I think this is a little bit too close to her head, but that's very easy to fix. I can just take my LA Diamante, shrink that text just a hair. That looks pretty good. Take this black bar, I can just move it left, and we fix that issue. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is we need to sharpen everything up so that when it comes out on screen, it looks nice and crisp. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to collapse everything. So I'm going to merge visible. So everything's merged. And then I'm going to do my last step, which is sharpen. And I'm going to use Smart Sharpen. I'm really going to sharpen this up. So I've sharpened this by 89%. So it really adds a lot of definition in that grain and in those lines. And I will say OK. And voila, we have a finished movie poster.
Well, that was a blast putting all of that stuff together. Now, don't beat me up. I know now that Rent actually means the race in German, not run, but it doesn't matter. You get the point. And I hope you had a lot of fun putting together a sci-fi movie poster. So try this out at home. You can shoot this using speed lights as well as studio strobes. So try something out. And then if you have something that's awesome, please share it with us by posting it to our Flickr group. Well, thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you again next week.
This episode is brought to you by Adorama TV. Visit the Adorama Learning Center where you'll find photography tips and techniques, links to the gear used in this episode, and related videos. For all the latest photography, video, and computer gear, visit Adorama.com. And the next time you're in New York City, visit our store located on 18th Street between 5th and 6th Avenue.
J.J. Abrams, take this.
Number 2, you have it so.
I'm trying to import the virus, Captain, but I need more RAM.
Digital Photography One-on-One is written and produced by Snap Factory. For more information about our workshops, visit snapfactory.com.